The farmer carefully examined the animal hide, then plucked a single hair from it and confidently told the king that it was the hide of a wild boar.
No!
Hearing this, the princess finally breathed a sigh of relief, because if anyone answered correctly, she would have to marry that person. The second challenger was a scholar. He took out a magnifying glass, studied the hide carefully, and finally told the king that it was tree bark. The princess nervously looked at her father. Thankfully, the king shook his head. Next came a knight to take on the challenge. Although the princess liked him very much, the knight still failed to give the correct answer. Just then, an ugly wild man walked forward. He had lived in the forest his entire life, so his sense of smell was extremely sharp. He simply stepped closer to the hide, sniffed it once, and immediately answered that it was the skin of a flea. Although the answer sounded completely unbelievable, the expression on the king's face instantly froze. To everyone's shock, the wild man had guessed correctly. It turned out that half a year earlier, at a royal ball, the princess had been playing music in the palace when a flea suddenly appeared on the king's hand. The king tried to brush it away, but discovered that the flea refused to leave. Instead, the king actually took the flea back with him and even pricked his own finger to feed it with his blood. Under the king's meticulous care, the flea quickly grew to the size of a soybean. Soon, 3 months passed, and the flea had grown to be as large as a small dog. The king was extremely pleased as he looked at his pet. However, because the flea became excessively obese and lacked exercise, it soon fell ill. The king immediately summoned doctors from all over the country, but the doctors were terrified the moment they walked in, because they had never seen such a monster before. Since none of them had ever encountered a flea this large, no doctor knew how to treat it, and in the end, the flea died. Watching his beloved pet stop breathing, the king was overwhelmed with grief. But soon, he came up with what he believed to be a perfect idea. He ordered the doctors to keep the matter strictly confidential. By this time, the princess had reached marriageable age. The king had once asked her what kind of husband she wanted, but the princess was uncertain and asked her father to help her choose. So the king had workers skin the flea, then summoned the strongest men from across the land. He announced that whoever could correctly identify what animal the hide came from would marry his daughter. The king originally wanted to select a husband with intelligence and wisdom for the princess, but he never expected that the correct answer would be given by a wild man. When the princess saw that this ugly wild man was about to become her husband, she could not accept the outcome. Crying, she ran onto the rooftop, intending to take her own life. The king immediately rushed over to stop her and urged her to calm down, telling her that as a king, he had to honor his promises. In order to protect her father's dignity, the princess ultimately had no choice but to agree. Early the next morning, the wild man set off with the princess. They passed through a dense forest, climbed steep cliffs, and finally arrived at the cave where the wild man lived. Seeing the animal remain scattered all over the ground, the princess was instantly filled with despair. The wild man took out an animal leg and tried to offer it to the princess to eat, but she was so frightened that she hid in a corner. The wild man could not understand why. Even though he had given the princess what he believed was the best food, she still did not like him. Enraged, the wild man dragged the princess into the room.